this edition of Michigan Chronicle News Now. A lot to talk about with the guy who's joining me next. He is the Attorney General for the state of Minnesota. Joining us right now is Keith Ellison. Thank you so much for being here.
Good to be here. Thank you.
And Detroit native?
I'm born and raised in Detroit, Michigan, and I'm here in town because at my brother's church, Church of the New Covenant Baptist, we're going to be talking about a book that I just wrote.
Yeah, and so let's get into that book because a lot has happened. A lot has transpired over the past few years since the murder of George Floyd. And
that's right.
You chronicle that journey in your new book. And it's actually a book that you'll have a book signing for this upcoming week.
Yeah, absolutely. So Sunday, the 9th of July at 3 o'clock at Church of the Covenant New Baptist, Church of the New Covenant Baptist, we're going to sign some books. We're going to talk about how we can end the cycle of police violence in America, state violence in America. And we're going to chart a new course where we can have public safety and human rights together. So that'll be enriching conversation. Hope folks come out.
Yeah. So let's get into the book, Breaking the Wheel, ending the cycle of police violence. Before we get deep into that discussion, take us back through what life was like as your office wrapped itself around the evidence and circumstances that surrounded the bullseye focus that was on Minnesota at the time.
Right.
In Minneapolis, where you had the officer Derek Chauvin putting his knee to the neck of George Floyd and then announcing those charges. Take us back to what that moment was like and that charge.
Well, quite honestly, we sort of isolated ourselves a little bit because we didn't want to be subject to any sort of pressure from any source, not from community, not from policing. We wanted to just take a very clear look at the evidence and the law. And it became clear to us as we were assessing the case that one, we had to get the charges right. So the charges that were against Derek Chauvin only, when I got the case, we thought were not adequate because there was a third-degree murder charge, which is a charge that we thought had a very shaky legal basis, and then there was a second-degree manslaughter, which if he was convicted of that was a maximum he would be about 48 months. That's not the statutory maximum, but it's what people generally get. And so we thought we had to look at the charges, and what we found is that it would be impossible, and this is a fact, to kill George Floyd if only Derek Chauvin's knee was on his neck. If that was the only thing, if there was only Derek Chauvin there, George Floyd would be alive today. But he needed Alexander King to press George Floyd's back into the pavement. He needed Thomas Lane to hold George Floyd's legs, and he needed Tou Thao to keep anyone from rendering aid to George Floyd. So it really was a joint enterprise. The knee on the neck is the dramatic thing. It's the thing that Darnella Frazier captured on her video. But the mechanism of death really had a lot more to do with the fact that his knee was pinned, his chest was pressed into the concrete asphalt, and his leg, and he couldn't twist his body because his legs were being held. Those three things together are what led to asphyxia, mechanical asphyxia, and killed George Floyd. So we had to determine that before we issued any charges, because we knew we only had one chance to get it right. So we added a charge of second-degree murder. We left the third-degree murder, though we thought it was of dubious legal basis, and we left in the manslaughter charge. Then we had to be clear. We had the medical causation right. And what does that mean? That means that we knew that they were going to say, no, he died of fentanyl overdose. Oh, he died of meth overdose. Oh, he died of enlarged heart.
Right.
He had other medical comorbidities that simply, it was a coincidence that he just died right then, but it really wasn't. And so we knew we had to exclude all those things. We had to go quickly through the medical evidence and show to a high degree of medical certainty that the cause of death was asphyxia caused by the officers being on his neck and chest and legs, and that they refused to render any medical aid after they put him in that condition. So,
but this isn't just any case that your office would have, just prosecuted.
Well, we prosecute murders all the time, but police ones, you're right. We never before had we done it.
You hadn't ever done it before, and the spotlight, the attention on this case was definitely high profile.
Sure was.
With the pressure on your office. I know you say you try to take yourself out, or your office out of everything that's happening on the outside, but in retrospect, when you announced the charging decisions and everything that followed, what was that like?
Well, I felt the weight of history, but I got to be very candid with you and everybody. And I had been doing these kind of cases for many years. I spent 16 years as a criminal defense lawyer, where all I ever did was represent people who were accused of crimes. And then during that same time, when I was in private practice, I often took civil rights cases where I sued the police for excessive force. And I can tell you, 2 blocks north of where George Floyd was killed, in 1997, I had a case involving a young man named Lawrence Miles. And Lawrence Miles was shot in the back, absolutely 100% in the back. The trajectory of the bullets was just straight through his body at a perpendicular level. And we took that case to trial as a civil matter, because nobody was going to have a charge a case like that. And quite honestly, we lost. And the officer said we thought he had a weapon, and he might have turned quickly, and that was enough for the jury to find in favor of the defense. So quite honestly, the world saw that we won this case involving George Floyd, but I'll never forget those people who we couldn't bring justice to. Those things prepared me for that moment. I mean, if you ever see somebody who wins a tennis match or wins a basketball game, they done lost a lot too. And so I was very mindful that this moment, we had prepared for a lifetime to be successful in this moment. And that's what was on my mind.
And as you chronicle those events in real time and also reflecting back at that time, it inspired you to write this book. And what are you hoping that people take away from it?
Well, here's the thing. Police violence, state-sponsored violence against black communities is a historic problem in our country, and it's a nationwide problem in our country. And I don't want to submit that only black people are victims of police violence and that police are always wrong. Police are often right, and I'm one who admires people in law enforcement. But nobody can deny that when Martin Luther King got up in 1963 and at the I Have a Dream speech, he was talking about police brutality. When Walter White and Thurgood Marshall were fighting for African Americans for racial justice in the South, often the case started with police brutality. When John Lewis decided to march over the Edmund Pettus Bridge and was met by an attacking mob of Alabama state troopers, that was police brutality. But in the event that started it all was the murder of Jimmy Lee Jackson in Marion, Alabama, where an Alabama trooper shot him down for no reason. So, what's my point? We cannot deny that whether you're talking about George Floyd, Tyree Nichols, Breonna Taylor, Sandra Bland, or going all the way back to Isaac Woodard, who was blinded by a police officer in Batesville, South Carolina, when he was in uniform, 5 hours after he was discharged as a hero in World War II. We've got this constant stream of police violence against African Americans, and we got to break the wheel.
But how do we break that wheel? Because I know your book is also focused on solutions, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
And it's part of that solution also getting more black people into the career field of law enforcement or criminal justice. But how do you do that?
Well,
you have a society in our community, in the black community, that fears the police, and really doesn't embrace the profession.
Well, here's an interesting thing about that, because you're right. If you talk to a lot of African American parents, you say, "Hey, your daughter wants to be a police officer." Many of them will say, "I'm not sure I'm with that idea." But at the same time, some of the most progressive police organizations in America are black police groups, like Noble. Noble is a black police officers association, and therefore civilian review, accountability. Our African American police chief, Madera Arredondo, fired the people who killed George Floyd within 24 hours after seeing the video. So yeah, we have this ambivalent relationship with the police. Why? Because on the one hand, the black community is over-policed, but on the other hand, we're under-protected. So, like, what happens to the black girl who was raped? What happens to the black boy who was shot down by the street? Is anybody looking to bring the people to justice who did this, no matter what color they might be? Oftentimes, black victims are ignored. Oftentimes, black victims are not the focal point of law enforcement energy. Now, you let a white girl get killed, and they appropriately do turn heaven and earth to find out who did it. But if it's a black person who's a victim of a crime, oftentimes we're like, oh well, you know how they do that to each other, black on black crime.
Well, I was just gonna go there because oftentimes in certain conversations or groups in the black community, black on black crime, some would suggest in some circles that is an issue that we should confront. And some others in the black community will say black on black crime is a myth, and crime happens in all.
I agree with them. I think that they're right. I call it community-based crime. But nobody can really doubt, if you look at numbers, that crime and violence is a problem throughout the United States for people of all colors. Look, we've had 180 days in this year. We've had over 300 mass shootings. Don't tell me that we don't have a violence problem in the United States that affects people of all backgrounds, right? So people have a right to be safe. I am a prosecutor. I believe people should be safe. I don't want your family or mine or anybody's to have to worry about the safety of their children. On the other hand, we can't use the excuse of public safety to justify violation of African American human rights. And I will just add this. In fact, I think that the systematic violation of African American civil and human rights leads to lower levels of safety. I think we would be a safer society if we cleaned up our human rights problem, because what does the human rights problem do? It damages trust. And you can't keep a community safe if the people don't trust the guardians who are responsible for keeping them safe and secure. Because if I think that police are a danger and are harmful, and I've seen them brutalize people for no good reason, then am I going to call them when I see a crime? Am I going to report that information? Am I going to share that information? Am I going to comply with the subpoena, or am I going to be conveniently just not around? If I hear that it was Jimmy Jones who actually shot Sammy Smith, and Sammy Smith's mother is grieving, brokenhearted, and because she didn't even know who killed her son, maybe I know who did it, but I'm not gonna say nothing because that'd be like snitching to the cops. So I think that this human rights problem that we have is undermining our ability to be safe as a community.
Let's talk about George Floyd once again, because following the whole scenario, the case during and afterwards surrounding Derek Chauvin, DEI became the focal point in conversation everywhere on diversity, equity, and inclusion efforts across industries and companies. That they will be more intentional on being more diverse. What's your take on it? Has it had any impact on the society, or has it been more performative based?
Well, I'm one who, I'm an optimistic guy, right? So I'll say it's a good thing that people say they want to do it. Actually, before you do it, you probably need to declare your intention to do it. And then we have something to hold you accountable with, right? Your word. So I think it's better that it was declared, in performative or not, but I think we still have an implementation problem. So I'm glad that companies said they wanted to do it. Now they actually have to do it. And what does that mean? Particularly in light of the Supreme Court outlawing affirmative action.
I want to get to that too.
But what it means is that they have to have a more aggressive, more inclusive, and it means that communities have a right to say, look, We pay taxes like anyone else. We buy your products, and we insist upon being part of the profit equation too. Because one of the big problems here is we don't have enough shared prosperity. Oftentimes, regardless of color, the police tend to, not always, but tend to focus the violence problem that I write about on the poor. George Floyd was an unemployed bouncer at some local clubs and at the Salvation Army. He was disemployed because of COVID. So here he is at a corner store in a neighborhood that is considered a low-income neighborhood. I don't think it is, but that's the rap, right? And so the police kind of felt licensed to treat him the way they wanted to because of who he was and where he was, and so if we had shared prosperity, if we had meaningful supports, maybe fewer people will find themselves in a horrible situation like that.
Let's talk about somewhat your journey, but let's also dive into an area that our current events has had given us no choice but to talk about.
Events have been very current.
Events have definitely been very current. Before you were the state attorney general for Minnesota, you served in the U.S. House.
Yeah, I was there for 12 years.
Yeah. So let's talk.
Served with John Conyers.
Absolutely.
My hero
from Michigan.
Yeah.
So, current events of the day. The Supreme Court last week issued a couple different rulings. They weighed in and issued their ruling on 63-62 about affirmative action when it comes to college admission, struck that down. Also, they weighed in on the case of financial student loans. Where are we as a society given these two rulings?
Great question, because it has everything to do with this issue of break the wheel and dealing with this issue of police violence. Where are we? I think that we should look to the period between 1877 and I'd say 1960. There was a period in there between after Reconstruction, all the way up through the 1950s. African Americans were in a period where we saw retrenchment. After the Civil War ended, 180,000 black folks put on uniform and fought to keep the Union from being, and the Union responded for about a decade in a somewhat positive way. And then after 1877, you saw the black codes come in, and by 1896, you see Plessy versus Ferguson, Supreme Court decision retrenching and retracting rights. And what do we see right now from this Supreme Court? Retrenchment, retraction. So you saw slaughterhouse cases, civil rights cases, and culminating in Plessy. There was a case that basically licensed mob violence and murder and lynching called the Cruikshank case out of Colfax, Louisiana. And all these ugly Supreme Court cases happened between 1877 and 1910, and then you see black people kicked out of federal employment in 1903. You see all this. You see what they call, some historians call it the nadir, which is the low point. You see a massive lynching. I mean, it wasn't just we were taking our right. It wasn't just official society. It wasn't just the cloth napkin set who was taking our right away. It was also the racial terrorism, and it happened all over the country. And so in 1919, 1920, you have Tulsa, you have the Duluth lynching in Minnesota, you have the Elaine massacre in Arkansas, you have all this horrible. I think James Weldon Johnson called it the Red Summer, and he meant the blood running in the streets. So we should take a cue from that period of time and ask ourselves, what does it mean if the Supreme Court is moving decisively against people's rights? This Supreme Court, 2013, Shelby County, gutting the Voting Rights Act. Then after that, you have the Citizens United, basically meaning corporations can buy any election. Then what do you got? You got epic systems, meaning workers cannot come together to try to get their rights and to go through those arbitration clauses, weakening them. Then you have brewing recently, which is the one where it says guns here, guns there, guns everywhere. And then you have these recent decisions over the Dobbs decision. And I think a lot of African Americans need to ask themselves, what does Dobbs mean to us? Well, first of all, black people were not allowed to own their body during slavery, and scarcely owned it up until the end of Jim Crow. And now here we are back again, where people can't own their bodies, can possess their bodies anymore, and it all depends on what state they live in. So, I mean, where are we now? We are in a moment of retrenchment. What we need is massive organizing. What we need is massive engagement. And history does not repeat itself, but it rhymes. Meaning, we're not fated to that ugly period I'm referring to. We can make a new reality, but we got to be clear that we are confronting retrenchment.
You talk about we need massive engagement and organization.
Yeah.
We're going to wrap up in a moment, but in your role as Attorney General, certainly it is a role that requires you to be fair, right?
You got to be fair.
When you look at the makeup of the Supreme Court,
right?
You know,
unfair.
We say that justice is supposed to be blind.
Sure.
But the makeup of the court is also, there's the layer political avenue and how they got there.
No, you're right. I mean,
right? So when you talk about engagement and organization, people voting, that still matters, right?
Oh, people, let me tell you, voting may matter more now than ever. I mean, we have to completely destroy this idea that not voting is a protest. No, not voting is giving up. Not voting is a surrender. Not voting is saying, I'm fine with Clarence Thomas telling me what to do with my life. That's what that is. That is completely antithetical to any sort of self-determination. So we need massive turnout. Now if we vote in massive numbers, that will not change the Supreme Court overnight. But if we get enough people in the Senate and in the House, then we can put term limits on the Supreme Court. We can impose ethical rules on them. Harlan Crow basically controls Clarence Thomas, and Alito and Roberts are both swimming in money from special interests. And maybe we can pass an ethical standard for them so that they can't be so obviously bought off by outside interests.
Speaking of Justice Clarence Thomas, your take on his decision and opinion on the affirmative action, given that he benefited from it.
Well, Clarence Thomas, all you got is anybody who's watched the movie Django, just watch Stephen and you see Clarence Thomas. Clarence Thomas has decided that his best personal interest is siding with the powerful and the special interests, and regardless as to who they're going to hurt. He's like, I'm looking out for me, and I don't care nothing about you. But I'm on the Supreme Court, so it's my job to look out for you. So he's abdicating his responsibility. He has abdicated it a long time ago. When he got in office, he was this way. He's this way now. Maybe he's worse now. So Clarence Thomas needs to be impeached. Clarence Thomas is illegitimate and has no basis in the job that he's in. And it's a lesson to us as African Americans. What is the lesson? We all thought, well, he's a black man raised in the Deep South. He knows what racism, segregation is. He knows what affirmative action is. He's going to come around one day. Understand that it's not a matter of pigment. It's not what's on your skin. It's what's in your mind. And so, look, we need somebody who's going to be for the people, no matter what color they are. I'd take John Brown over Clarence Thomas, 10 days out of 10. You understand what I'm saying? And so we've got to evaluate people, not just as, oh, that's the brother right there, he's going to do the right thing. That brother, how do you know? Ask him some questions. See where he stands on the matters that you care about, and vote your interest. That's what we got to do, man.
Ketanji Brown Jackson.
Love her.
Justice.
See there? The sisters doing the right thing again, But then look, but let's not forget about Sotomayor and even Elaine Kagan. They're holding it down, right? So I'll tell you this: we have some things to build on, but we are definitely in a moment of retrenchment, and we need to be aware of it, and we need to fix it.
Finally, as a native Detroiter, and
my town,
what do you? enjoy most when you come back home?
Oh, first of all, family. I get to hang out with my brother Brian, who's we're so proud of him. He's a pastor of the, Church of the New Covenant Baptist, and my brother Leonard is a physician, and he's healing the sick here in town. And my dad, 94 years young,
Wow.
still, dispensing wisdom. But then, the next generation, nieces and nephews. I was talking to my little nephew. He's in college now, works at a restaurant downtown. He's excited about the future of Detroit. And, Detroit is a wonderful place full of awesome people. Before Martin Luther King ever said, "I have a dream" in Washington, he said it on Woodward Avenue.
We did.
And so
60 years ago.
that's right. And so this is a great town, a magical town, blessed town, and we need to really value Detroit, say good things about Detroit, because there's a lot of good things to say.
And was it, and as you prepare to sign books this upcoming Sunday, was it injustice that you saw or police brutality that inspired you to go into public service?
I tell you, my brother Brian, we had a grandfather who we never met. His name was Frank Martinez. According to my mom and others, he was organizing black voters in the 1950s. When in Natchitoches Parish, Louisiana, you could easily get killed doing stuff like that. My mom would tell stories about how they wouldn't sell him gasoline. He had to put tractor fuel in his car.
Wow.
And if it wasn't for my uncle Boo, who was a great man, he wouldn't be able to fill his tank. They had burned a cross in the house in the city to threaten the family and the neighbors, and they did these things. And so that's who raised my mom, and my mom is who raised us. If I did not, all five of us, I got four brothers. Every single one of us does some element of public service. My oldest brother heals the sick. My brother Brian heals the souls, and he's a lawyer. My brother Tony presses the legal claims of working class folks in Roxbury, in Massachusetts, and my brother Eric does the same in North Carolina. So none of us are greedy, self-interested money grubbers who only care about ourselves. Well, none of us are trying to be broke, right? Because that too. But you can do well and do good, right? And so my point is, it's a family tradition to do service. We're not the only ones with that family tradition, but we do have that family tradition. My mom was a social worker. She served kids in juvenile court in Wayne State for many years. And my dad, was a psychiatrist and had dealt with the mental anguish and mental illness and disease of people in the city of Detroit to help heal those families. So this is what we're about. And as I said, we're not chauvinistic. We ain't no better than nobody. We ain't no less than nobody. But we have this family legacy of service. So I would say that I don't know how else I could have done anything different. If my mom would have been alive when George Floyd was murdered, she would have been absolutely appalled. And if I would have even thought about not helping, I would have got a stern talking to, and I would have got a half portion of gumbo.
Well,
She'd be like, "You, no crab in your gumbo."
I'm sure that she is proud, looking down and proud of the work that you've been able to do to bring justice to so many families, and the effort that you do every single day. So,
well, let me commend the Great Michigan Chronicle. I mean, I just want to say that you guys have 100 years of service, letting the people know what's going on, giving news and information to the people who need it most, and I'm grateful for that. I mean, you guys, the black press in general has been trying to break the wheel for over 100 years. Yeah. If you look through 100 years of publications by the America's black press, you would chronicle all the great triumphs. You'd also chronicle all of the lynchings, all of the mass violent actions. You'd see the whole story. Yep. So thank you guys.
Thank you so much for joining us. We appreciate it, and we do our best to chronicle the best in us and also the issues that impact us. So thank you so much for coming on down to Studio 1452 and joining us here at Michigan Chronicle Real Times Media. Keith Ellison, the
Break the Wheel.
Break the Wheel, author of Break the Wheel, Ending the Cycle of Police Violence, and your book signing is this upcoming Sunday in Detroit.
Yeah, right in Detroit, right on Puritan Avenue, Church of Government.
Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you.
And thanks for watching this edition of Michigan Chronicle News Now.